My mind has been active on a particular topic in the last little while, in the last few days, and I'm going to ruminate out loud. I'm just going to try and make this up as I go along because these thoughts are kind of fresh still in my mind. And why is it that people obsess about being right? People have an obsession, we all have an obsession that focuses that whatever opinion or ideas or thoughts we might have, they're right, until they're proven wrong, but they're right. So we obsess quite often about being right. And then what I was, this is very interesting, apropos, I was watching a document on a woman called Agafia, who is a survivor of a religious, a religious prosecution in Russia, and they are called the believers that end up in a very isolated part of Siberia. And it turns out that her family was obsessed by the idea that they're being persecuted and followed, and there may have been in the history, there were ordinances under a czar, I guess, before in the late 1800s. I don't know all the details around this, and it's not that crucial. What I want to draw attention to is how being right leads people to despair. Yes, these people are in isolation and despair, the people that are right. So these believers, Agafia, I'm going to put a little attachment underneath where you can watch this documentary. It's not a brilliant work of any kind, but it highlights this idea I've been having that people are obsessed with being right. I at times feel even obsessed with being right, and that I am right until I'm wrong. But even if I was right, at what expense? And my thoughts, my ruminations on this obviously have to do with the fight we're in to expose the catastrophe at Fukushima every day. It's what I live with, what I wake up with, the idea I am right about this having occurred. There is no equivocation as far as that is concerned. But my ruminations on this is, how do I become a better person, not just because I'm right, but because I have understood something that may be right, but what is more crucial, what is more important, is something other than being right. And this is something I observe for myself and outside of myself, and this is an epidemic, by the way. When you look at YouTube's and social media and mainstream media and all the people that are projected to be or promoted to be so magnificent and wonderful, and they're not. And we can just look close by at the stars, the icons of our culture that are really not what they appear to be in their films or in how they're projected, because they project somehow a truth about being right in themselves. You have stars like Tom Cruise, or the heroes, the Gord Downies, or the Neil Youngs, the David Suzuki's, the Maikicho Kaku's. These people that are held up through their own projection of showing us how they're right. They're always trying to show us how they're right. And how does that lead to a level of despair? And I think culturally, collectively, we're in a very heightened level of despair. Hearts are broken. I've made a video on this. And why is it that we have this obsession to be right? And what is missing? What is missing? Or what is it covering even? What is it covering up? And as a sort of human being that is attempting to be born, I'm attempting to be born in something that, in a sense, I surpass the people that come before me. And art is interesting in that we measure ourselves to some extent. It's not the most important part, but we see how we move through different ages, different perception, different understandings, and express that understanding, express our time, the time that we're in. The great artists always express the time that they're in, and the times are also very personal, how they are as human beings, how they have absorbed something about what it is that makes them them and pass it on. And then we look at a painting or we look at something that is creative and artistic and we judge ourselves accordingly. And we now have picked all the wrong heroes to judge ourselves against. And I do this in terms of art history. I look at work that was produced and what it is that matters to me, what really matters to me, and something that somebody has to offer me, so that I learn that I could be born, that I could be born. It's not born again. We have not been born yet. We are coming into this, and this notion of being correct, right, we have the truth on our side, misses something very fundamental. It always rears itself, this kind of extraordinary hubris with which people produce their content on YouTube. This idea of bludgeoning everyone with their content, with their truth, with their rightness. And what I find to be quite extraordinary, and what I've been sort of, in my way, in the best way I can at this point, highlighting and promoting, is that whenever we are convinced how right we are, it is actually quite often, not always, quite often, attempting to displace the real battle, and it's not an intellectual thing. It's a deep inner battle. That inner battle is being lost. So I'm going to try and explain this the best I can. It's difficult to explain, but what it is that happens when we achieve this sort of Mount Olympus feeling about something, quite often what happens is that we ignore the true path that we might be on. In other words, this feeling of being right takes us into a direction that isn't actually the direction we should be in. And this Agathia woman, who lives by herself for the last 27 years, totally afflicted, in total, utter, destitute despair about having been right. She is a religious Christian person who practices her faith in total obscurity. It's kind of like that hermit in the middle of nowhere, but in a totally dejected way. It's quite an incredible testimony to the human will, no matter what kind of idea. And I'm not a proponent of no matter what. If something isn't working, change it. Somehow change it. Now, her circumstances are quite difficult for many reasons. Her upbringing, her traditions, the things that she got that she has subjugated herself to, but she's got to be right. She's got to be right no matter what, and it's sinking her ship. It'll sink her ship, and it'll sink all our ships if we're not following our path, whatever that might be, whatever that inner calling might be. And the only way we can find out is to test it as much as possible in our actions, and in our actions that again require us to do the right thing. And whether we are, now I say the right thing, interesting, that we think we are right, but we are only right in our actions as they are affecting the people around us and life around us. Everything around us is affected by how we act, unless we're like totally in the middle of nowhere, but we even can affect the environment or whatever in the middle of nowhere anyway. I don't want to get sidetracked. So this has been ruminating in me for the last few days about what I try to incorporate in the videos that I do, and I'm doing a lot less now because it's not necessary. It's not necessary because we all know, we all know Fukushima is the greatest epic, tragic event in all of man's history on this planet. Never mind man's, humankind's, womankind's history. All of life is now totally under threat from this monster ugly, ignorant technology called nuclear fission. We live in the age of fission. And what it is that prevents us from being born, essentially, is this obsession with being right. And the fact that we are surrounded by events that affect everything, like Fukushima and other events, tragic events, does not mean that we are caught in some form. And I say caught because knowing what I know makes it very difficult to actually go on in a way that still maintains my openness of spirit every day without going into despair, like this Agafia woman. And it's really worthwhile to have a look at this person who believes herself to be totally right and her life has been destroyed by it. And the only way that we can recover something for ourselves primarily, and that will lead into actions that we begin to do the right thing as we follow our calling, what we're capable of doing, is to succeed in this inner battle. And there is nothing that makes it right or wrong. It is a way of coming into our own selves in such a way that we actually begin to become aware of something of value and meaningful outside of us. But we can't do that as long as we feel we're right about everything. It's literally abandoning ourselves to something that we have never actually considered to be of value. Not sure if this makes sense, but it just keeps coming up over the last 5-6 days. I'm literally obsessing about this. I'm trying to extricate it from my mind, but I can't get rid of it because I obviously feel it in my own life, this sort of conviction that I have about certain things and knowing them to be true, but acting accordingly in a way that doesn't make me be this person with this hubris and self-righteousness and all that kind of stuff attached to it. Some of you may feel I'm dancing on this pin in some way, but it's quite an affliction. And the humility that it requires to say that I'm wrong about something is as important as being right about something. So anyway, nothing will change around us in our lives unless this is I understand this. I need to be able to apply this. And the worst thing is to be convinced you're right and have your life ruined by that. Hope this makes sense.